Hi, this is Christopher Perrin, and welcome to this episode of the Christopher Perrin Show. I am delighted to have with me Dr. Grant Horner and Karen Moore. Both are wonderful colleagues and educators who have been, friends for more years than I care to count right now. But we have been around the block, and the block that's interesting that we've both traveled. All three of us rather have traveled in the last maybe 10 years is Italy, for related but independent reasons. Grant, you got interested in starting a program in Florence with Masters University, and Karen, you went and did a master's degree at Edinburgh, and you started to think about archaeology in Latin, and you're a Latin educator and a Latin author. Both of you are authors, and you had to go to Italy too. So eventually it seems like classical educators hear this call that they're supposed to return to Italy. So Grant, if you just introduce yourself and tell us what attracted you to Italy, and then pass it on to Karen.
Yeah, well, the first really great story, right? The Odyssey. It's a nostos. It's a return home. All of us long to return home. There's nothing like Thanksgiving and going home or coming back from a trip and seeing your family. And for me, going to Italy as many times as I've done it, I just came back from my 35th time. These visits range from a week or 10 days to 2 months. I've spent thousands of days in Italy, and I'm more at home there than anywhere else. I get lost in my town in Southern California that I live in of 400,000 or 500,000 people. I get lost driving around there still. I do not get lost.
When you're in Florence, you know exactly where to go.
I don't get lost in Venice anymore. But, what's that saying? All roads lead, to Italy generally, and Rome ultimately. I started off my career about 35 years ago as a Renaissance scholar, was teaching at major research universities, ended up with a wonderful opportunity at the Masters University in Southern California. And if you're a Renaissance scholar, you also have to be a classicist. So I had to study Latin and Greek and all that old stuff along the way, and try and understand the relationship that these Christian humanists, originally all Catholic and then some going Reformed after the 16th century, how they dealt with classical Greco-Roman thought, a lot of it pagan, but quite a bit of it early post-apostolic Christian, and how they thought about literature and art and culture and humanity, and how they dealt with the question of quid est homo, what is a man? In the Bible, Psalm 8, I think verse 2, what is man that thou art mindful of? Why would God give a moment of thought to us? But also the human philosophical self-examination, anthropological question of what exactly am I? Like, what am I? Am I just physical, or am I illusorily physical? I'm actually a spiritual being. Am I a spirit in a body with a spirit? All these kinds of questions. And that's what people in the Renaissance and the classical world, and I think all humans in all cultures, ultimately try to wrestle with, if they can do so. And I've been fascinated with that question. I worked for a study abroad program many years ago, 25 years ago. And my first day in Italy, I was teaching in Italy. I was walking through Venice, and a couple days later, walking through Florence. Did not know either city. And I would point to this and that. And of course, the night before, I was furiously memorizing maps and facts, and probably doing a pretty bad job. But I fell in love with it immediately. I mean, it's kind of a love at first sight thing. And eventually made it down to Rome. Didn't like it the first few times. Too big, too loud. I got lost. I was intimidated.
A lot of scooters.
And a lot of scooters. A lot of fast Italian drivers, heavy buses, things like that. But later fell in love with that city as well. And I realized the reason I was connecting so much with Italy is that I had been studying the Renaissance for so long already at that point in time. And Florence, which is where my program is based, is the culla del Rinascimento. It's the cradle of the Renaissance. And that means it's the cradle of the modern world. And it's that place where an attempt to revive Greco-Roman culture, the best aspects of those cultures, really begins with Petrarch and his colleagues after Dante, and all the great Renaissance geniuses are classicists. And if I'm going to study the Renaissance, I specialize in things English cultural and literary history. But you have to go to Italy.
Yes, you have to go to Italy. It's like it's going. You start. I like the way you're describing your intellectual journey, your own education, is tracing sources back, and as you go ad fontes, eventually you find yourself in this cradle, and in so many ways, Italy is a mother of us all. We probably don't want to over sentimentalize it, but it is extremely beautiful. I remember traveling through Italy the first time on the train from, Rome to Florence, and thinking, the whole country is full of is rolling mountains and hilltop towns. I thought maybe there would be a few. I thought such an ancient country would be densely populated.
Sea cliffs and the Alps and the creeks.
The Apennines, yeah.
The line from Byron, Italia, O Italia, that hast thy fatal beauty, right? That dowry, because everyone sees your beauty and wants to snatch you away. It's astonishing.
It's still what Byron saw. How about you, Karen? How did you find your way to Italia?
So my first trip to Italy was at the age of 18. It was the summer after my senior year. I had graduated, and my Latin teacher would take a small group of students every other year. I had studied Latin for 6 years, 4 years with this particular teacher, Susan Fugate, who was a mentor. And it was my first time across the pond, as they say. And because she had been my teacher, and specifically with Latin, she was able to help me connect what I was seeing with what I had read. So as we would walk through the forum, for example, she showed us the font of Juturna and said, now remember in Virgil's Aeneid, Juturna was the sister of Turnus there, and she's a Latin deity, and so she would take these things. Or she'd seen inscriptions someplace. Remember when we read this line from Horace? Well, here it is. And it made these words on a page come to life for me. And it so profoundly impacted me that I can still remember thinking, Lord, I want to do this one day. I want to bring my students to have this transformational experience, to meet with the authors, to meet with the scenes that they have read about. And so fast forward, I won't tell you what year that was, but fast forward to 2016. I've been teaching at Grace Academy for many years, and Dr. David Diener, our friend, was the head of school at the time. And so we took the first Grace Academy class to Italy, which happily included my eldest son, Michael. And we were able to do those same things, is take them and tell the students, here's what you've been reading in the Aeneid, or here's what you've been reading in Shakespeare. Here's what you read with Machiavelli. Let's go stand at the tomb of Machiavelli in Florence. Let's talk about Galileo in Florence, where he was. And to make these things come to life for them. So then the following year in 2017, I was able to go with the Virgilian Society on a program with Dr. Steve Tuck back to Italy. And I did this mainly because I thought I want to learn more. If I'm going to be the director of the senior trip program for Grace Academy, I want to learn more about how to connect material evidence to written texts. And that's exactly what Steve Tuck did for us. And so inspired me that that's actually why I went to Scotland. It's specifically to pursue a degree in classical art and archaeology with the intent of seeing how these two things have conversation with each other. And how can I bring that conversation into the classroom for my students, even before they're seniors, as I teach Latin, or as I teach ancient history, as I teach ancient literature, what can I bring of the art and archaeology of literature here, so that when I take them, they stand before these pieces and marvel, having known what they've seen. There's a wonderful story about Michelangelo and the discovery of the Laocoon. The Laocoon's being uncovered, and Michelangelo's brought to the site, and he looks at the Laocoon still half buried in dirt, and his response is, so this is the Laocoon of which Pliny the Elder speaks. And I want my students to be able to stand in front of the Laocoon, now at the Vatican Museums, and say, so this is the Laocoon of which Pliny the Elder speaks. This is the scene from the Aeneid. This is the scene from the poets and the tragic stories. And to have that moment of transformational wonder, and also an enticement, quite frankly, too, as they're studying, because now that the program's been in, I don't know what year here, I'm trying to do the math in my head really fast. But as the students, the younger students, have watched their older siblings, their older peers go to Italy, and as I now say to them, we're going to go see the Bernini statue of Apollo and Daphne. Let's read that story in Ovid's Metamorphosis, and let's look at that statue together. And then they carry that forward to being in situ, seeing it. Again, it makes the literature, the stories that we tell, more than words on a page, more than a homework assignment. It brings that sense of beauty and wonder and the realization of a conversation that has happened for centuries, for eons, that they, even in their youth, can begin to recognize and take part in. And I think you just get into a much deeper level in that there in Italy.
So we wanted to talk about pedagogy. We wanted to use Italy maybe as our way of getting there. I think one could make an argument that every classical educator and student should go to Italy, but not all can. But nonetheless, the experience of going to Italy, and like the ones that you just mentioned, are indicative of something, isn't it, that we need to do with students, whether we can go to Italy or not. So I wonder, you use language of participation and connection and anticipation. There's something very embodied about being able to be in situ, in the field, doing this kind of teaching. But it is Italy, and it is thousands of miles away. So can we do it here? And what are the pedagogical principles that are at play that you were describing? How else might you do what you did in Italy, even when you're in Texas or in California?
Well, I think the first step is teaching yourself. So I need to, as an educator, find out what is there that I want to bring in to my classroom. What are the masterpieces of art? What are the great works of architecture that I want to bring into the classroom? And how do they align well with whatever class or curriculum I'm teaching? And think about intentionally how to incorporate that. So, for example, I just mentioned the Bernini statue. I taught a course this spring to my students, both at Grace Academy and my undergraduate students at Houston Christian University, on the poetry of Ovid, specifically the Metamorphosis and its artistic reception. So we would read a story in the Latin, translating it, and then I would say, okay, now, my dear ones, when Bernini, I mentioned him earlier, made this sculpture, or another artist, John William Waterhouse, did some lovely watercolors of some of these different female figures. When they are trying to tell this story through their art, they're not just thinking about some story that they've heard once upon a time. Many times they have read the original Latin texts. So from my role as a Latin teacher, but of course I teach ancient literature and translation too. I'll say the same thing. I'll say, so I want you to look at this art, but I want you to look at it through the eyes of an artist who's read Virgil, or who's read Ovid, or who's read whatever. And how can you look at Bernini's Apollo and Daphne? I'll just use that as a case study to keep myself focused. How can you look at that and see the influence that Ovid had? Because after all, I believe it was the 12th century, is called the Aetas Ovidiana, because the amount of art that was produced based on the Metamorphosis. And so you'll see things like the way the fingers and the toes, the digitos, as Ovid calls them, become the branches of the roots. One of the things that I find the most dramatic is you see in Ovid that Apollo, he's gaining up to Daphne. He's finally getting close enough to reach out and touch her. He reaches around with his right hand, and it says in Ovid, and I'm saying this in translation, it says that he reaches around, but all he can feel is the heartbeat beneath the bark. Go stand before Bernini's statue. He has, now he uses the left hand, so there's a little bit of artistic license there, but the only place that Apollo comes into contact with Daphne in that statue is his hand, but the bark is there. He doesn't even touch the skin. So in that moment, Daphne's virginity, her maidenhood, is still intact. She's never actually touched. And then to see the face that as Ovid describes it, the emotion that he describes, interpreted through the expression of Apollo, the expression of Daphne, and then go stand at the back of this statue. Or if we're not standing at the statue, I can bring in pictures and slides, I can bring in 3D sculptures. When you turn that statue to the back, all you see is Apollo in a tree. You can't even see Daphne. She's gone, which is the very end of that story. So I think if I can't take my students to the Borghese Gallery, what I can do is I can bring that artwork to them and say, let's read this story and let's see how did this story inspire this artist. And then, as another assignment, can you go find another piece of art on the subject of Apollo and Daphne? Can you bring that in? I want you to tell me how you see that art reflecting off its story.
Ovid would be very happy with this conversation. I'll tell you why. Because the Metamorphoseon, which we were talking about earlier, Karen, is the singular most influential piece of cultural production in human history, I would say, only after the Old and New Testaments, as far as the breadth and the depth of its influence, certainly at least in the West. And so in the opening, when he says, my soul is carried along to sing of bodies changed in forms, right? Metamorphoseon, right? Which is a very nice Latin word with Greek root. And he's playing with forma and morphe. And in the middle of his title and in his opening lines in that beautiful dactylic hexameters, right? He metamorphoses forme and morphe. He morphs the form and he forms the morph, right? So he's immediately playing switcheroo on you. Nothing would please Ovid more than to have people 2,000 years later talking about an artistic narratological variation. Well, it wasn't the right hand, the left. Ovid would be like, that's right, that's how you do it. Because he took all those ancient myths with those ancient structures that go right into the roots of the human psyche. The pursuit, the one who flees. My joke with my students when I'm teaching Ovid is, so what were Daphne's last words when, the guy's closing around? She said, I just want to leave. It takes the students a few minutes to get it. I can tell who are the English majors and who are the communication majors, which is another me joke. But the cultural power generations later of something like that Daphne and Apollo story, which I always like to compare with the Pan-Syrinx story. What is this business about chasing girls and they turn into vegetative material to escape your clutches, and then you turn them into a musical instrument?
That's when you just don't learn
is this kind of wondering, eye-opening moment. And I do the same thing, a similar thing with Orpheus and Eurydice, right? This desperate, I would rather die than not have you. I will literally go to hell to get my girl back, and if I have to stay, then I'll stay. And then the power of music to transform and even draw a tear out of Pluto, Hades, the god of the underworld, and then the horrifying loss when, out of love for her, he turns around one step too soon, and her last words, Vale, and she sinks back down. I mean, if that doesn't draw a tear out of your eye in a classroom, then you have a bad teacher, because Ovid's really the teacher. Now, when it comes to going to Italy, students were like, why is Ovid so great? Well, he's Italian. Don't think of it as a Roman. There's something about that peninsula. There's something about the water in the Tiber. Well, you want to drink that, but something about the water in the Arno in Florence, certainly. But I shamelessly make use of YouTube when I'm preparing students to go to Italy. There is so much high quality, educationally sound content about every city, about every artist, about the pieces of art, about the literature, so that those of us that are classical scholars, and we're all classicists here, and I'm sure much of our audience are also classicists. To be a classicist in one sense, just disciplinarily, means you are interdisciplinary. The reason that Michelangelo Buonarroti said, that's the one in Pliny, was because he'd read the Historia Naturalis, and he knew his Latin, and he could read it, and he would read Pliny in the original and hear about this amazing statue that 3 guys had built a long time ago that was buried under the dirt in Rome. And here's a genius across multiple disciplines, culturally productive disciplines. He's a poet, a philosopher, kind of an amateur theologian. He's a sculptor, an architect, a painter, a draftsman, an engineer. Just what did he not do? And when he sees a statue being cleared out of a farmer's field, and he sees that horrifying face, his first thing is to make a classical quotation, which means he didn't just read it, he had it in his head. He knew the text, he knew the context, he knew about the history of sculpture, he knew about the fact that this was a lost statue, right? In other words, he had this kind of sublime flash of recognition, which means he was educated. He was educare. He'd been led out of himself. His mind had been expanded. What if his parents hadn't recognized the talent? What if his teachers hadn't recognized the talent? What if Lorenzo de' Medici, as the story goes, did not spot him one day in the Orto de' Medici in the Medici Sculpture Garden as a young teenager carving something that adults couldn't do? And somebody invested him in the kind of classical and Christian sense of, I am going to mentor, disciple, invest in you, and we're going to grow and cultivate what you have. So I don't tell students, here's your plane ticket, we're going to Italy. Hopefully I've taught them Latin, maybe a little Italian, and they've studied history and they've studied some architecture and art with me and some literature and philosophy, enough to be not entirely disoriented. But I also tell my students, when you get to Italy, expect to be disoriented, in Venice particularly, it's a little maze. But disorientation is of immense pedagogical value. As a matter of fact, if you don't start off by disorienting your students, you're never going to orient them properly.
Okay, let's follow that a little bit, because there's a number of braided pedagogical principles here. Certainly, it's an embodied pedagogy. When you're in the field, when you're in situ, you have to actually teach in the real world. You're not in the artificial classroom environment. As wonderful as it can be to just pull literature in, and even YouTube videos, or even replicated art, reproductions like of Bernini. But there's some other things going on too that I wonder if it wouldn't be worth talking about for the classical educators listening or watching. You're walking around. It's a kind of peripatetic educational pedagogy when you're in the field. And then to follow up on your comment about disorientation, you have to help them get somewhere. And maybe you don't just want them to follow you blindly to the next church or Duomo. You want them to start looking with their own eyes and figuring out for themselves where they are and where they should go next. And I'm thinking of Christ and his famous comment in Luke 6, where he says that a blind man will not lead. If a blind man leads a blind man, they both fall into a pit. But the student, when he's fully trained, will be like his teacher. That the teacher is in parallel with the blind man. The teacher is somebody who has seen something and wants to help his students to see as well. But you can't see for your students. They have to see for themselves.
Yeah. It's very much the Platonic cave.
Yeah.
Right? And I tell my students, we do different things in different cities, right? They're there with me for many, many weeks in Italy every summer. And in Rome, we're staying together. It's big, it's scary, it's intimidating. There's a few bad neighborhoods. And I'm going to guide you. In Florence, after I've walked you around a few times, you're going to learn the city. It's going to become like a second home to you, as it is to me. And you're going to spend a lot of free time there. In Venice, we get off the train and we drop our bags. And we meet downstairs in 15 minutes, and I put them in little groups, and I tell them, turn off your phones, start walking, get lost.
Now, just to interject a clarification, you're talking about your university students,
These are
correct?
university, yeah, they're all over 18.
Because this is the conversation that I know you and I have had, is what can you do with university students that you cannot do with high school students? So as much as I would love to do that with my high school students, I actually did that when I was a graduated senior. She would let us just go for the day, but we're in a different age, different day, different time. So I don't just give them that free reign, but at the same time, I will give them perimeters.
Yes.
So I might say, set up a little bit of a scavenger hunt or a treasure hunt, and we're going to go to this piazza, and this is what I want you to look for. Or these are some of the clues I want to give you. I also prepare ahead of time a little travel journal for them, because I want to find that balance between walking through Italy, constantly lecturing, and also their sense of really wonder and enjoyment and self-discovery. So I have little travel journals where in some cases they have quotes, like they have Ovid's quote from the Metamorphosis for when we go see the Bernini sculpture. We have quotes from the Aeneid for when they stand in the Forum at Rome. We have quotes from Horace and his monument more lasting than bronze when we stand in front of St. Peter's Basilica. So we have these different clues. I have some little maps in there so I can take them to a place and give them some general orientation, general guidelines, but then give them within boundaries some time to get across. I also think about a three-dimensional Socratic exercise. And when we're sitting around the table in the classroom, when we want to get beyond lecture and put them in the attitude of discoverer, we just ask questions, we don't give answers. So in many cases, I'll stand someplace and I'll start asking questions that cause them to think, to respond, to look, to listen, to observe. And so those are some more guided ways with a younger group that you might do the same thing that you're talking
Now,
about with an older group.
Isn't that pedagogy extendable to the classroom? And you don't have to be in Italy to do that, although
Correct.
it's the perfect thing to do in front
many
of
ways.
beautiful
And it's the
monuments and
bridge that
churches.
will link them together because my university students that I take to Italy, and I've taken a number of high school groups, probably 15 or 20 different times. But with the university students, there's a certain maturity level as a general rule and certain kind of freedoms that you wouldn't give to younger students. But my university students have been trained in several years of pedagogical classroom work with me because I don't do hardly any lecturing in any of my classes. They're all upper division classes, and I just ask questions. Okay, so you read Spencer's Fairy Queen, book 2. Tell me about it. And I'm just asking them, asking questions. And that's what happens in Italy. They've done a lot of pre-reading, and I've done some pre-lecturing for them. But when we arrive, and I come around into that beautiful cortile in the Vatican Museum, and they see the Laocoon statue, they don't go, "Oh, what's that? That looks cool." They know it. They've read the Aeneid. They've read it in Latin, and so now I'm asking questions. Are you surprised that it's smaller than you thought it was going to be? But when we saw David last week, he was bigger than you thought he was going to be. And it's a constant series of questions. So I think that constant, as you said, peripatetic, that walking around embodied pedagogy is helpful. At the end of the Vatican Museums, one of the last things you see, other than the Sistine Chapel, is the Stanze di Raffaello, the Raphael rooms. And you see that image that is in every classical school, the School of Athens fresco by Raphael. And I said, do you notice how tired your feet are now? You walk in the room, you turn and you, whoa, look at that, it's bigger than I thought. Wow, it's so vibrant. And I said, do you notice the irony of the fact that he paints Plato walking with the peripatetic walking philosopher, and here is Aristotle, looking like a very idealistic young Michelangelo, and we start playing with all those ideas. But there's something about being there that you can't replace in a classroom, but it doesn't mean that you have nothing in the classroom, and that the only great education will take place in situ in Italy, or even in an art gallery in the U.S.
Because it seems, you used to sign your name in email of Solvere Ambulando.
I do.
But yeah,
Still do.
to solve things by walking.
solve
So
by walking.
isn't there a way that you can walk with students even in the classroom? And isn't there a way that you can disorient them while they're in the classroom and get them to see? I mean, it's so lovely. You get to do it literally when you're, in Rome and you're before, a statue or a church. But it seems like it's a transferable pedagogy that we need to do this, by analogy at many other times.
And by disorient my students, I don't mean give them bad information. That's the job of the public schools, right? And then teach them how to think badly about things that are incorrect. What I mean is present them with something, a text, an idea, an image, a piece of music, and have it be overwhelming. Have the aesthetic experience and the complexity of thought, or maybe the simplicity of thought, be too much for them. And I let them just sit and stew. I just let it simmer, right? Instead of the student looking up from the Scantron saying, what do you want me to put? Which is an education. I want you to experience, hey, I don't even know how to deal with this painting or idea. Like, what do I do with Plato's cave? I want them to be disoriented, and then that's when you can reorient them through Socratic pedagogy and through the experience of discovering the things you don't know.
So when you're in a town or city like Rome or Florence, you do need to study the maps. You do need to orient yourself. And I love the fact that you want the students to get lost and then learn how to find themselves. So education as orientation is just an interesting metaphor if you think about the student being in a cosmos, which is like a great civitas that they have to find their way in and discover. And then also the metaphor of seeing, because particularly you, Karen, kept talking about how you wanted them to look at, gaze, see in light of their own reading. And we use this word, this verb, as a metaphor for coming to know things. You know, so many ways. It's this. I see what you're saying now.
Right.
And sometimes we use all the senses. I've actually thought about this recently. Like, what you said really moved me, and so we'll touch, or I smell something fishy. But we'll also say, I'm
hearing you.
I hear what you're saying, right?
Taste and see.
Yeah. So we use our senses that God has given us as metaphors for coming to know truth. So I'm wondering how taking students on a tour, an educational tour, can be applied in a classroom when they're actually not on a physical tour.
If only Italy had good food, it would be wonderful. We'd stay for weeks and weeks and weeks.
Yes, that's the one. You can't recreate the gelato in the classroom, I'm afraid.
Yeah. Although it would be great if we could.
It would be great. It would be great.
But how do you as when you're not in Italy, how do you as educators help your students to gaze at something true, good, and beautiful?
Well, we've spoken about the art, both of us, and looking at art compared to text. But then there's also, as I like to say, the material evidence, the archaeological pieces, the buildings. And, Grant and I have been talking a little bit outside the studio about Vitruvius, who we both admire. So reading his work and then using, by the way, Vitruvius wrote the 10 books on architecture, a work still studied today if you're going to take an architecture program at university. So to take his work about a Roman theater and to realize the design of the theater, the intent for acoustics in the theater, and then to ask them, can you reconstruct that on your own? And I've had students reconstruct it out of Legos, out of Jolly Ranchers, out of, every possible thing you can imagine. But then they engage more deeply in the idea of theater. And by the way, we then talk about how that applies to the theater class they're studying and what the design for that did, how a theater becomes an amphitheater when you put two together. So we start, and how that amphitheater is the foundation for, we're in Texas, we're in the USA, for football stadiums. So trying, and asking them too to look at that. When we go to the Coliseum, I note the 80 doorways all around the circumference of the amphitheater, and then I always tell them, look up at the top of the arch. You have the Roman numerals carved into the top of the arch because that's your entryway. I said, okay, that's just like your theater back home. So even in the classroom, if I'm not going to go see it in person, we can look at pictures, we can talk about Vitruvius, then we can, with our hands and our fingers and our creative minds, start to do our own imitation, our own replication, to bring in another sense, to get in that tactile bit.
We see order. We start seeing patterns, and these patterns are replicated with variety. I love the fact that the Colosseum has everything numbered, just like at the local basketball. Yes. And so many things, even from Rome, we still copy, like the width of our roads and railways and so forth. So something human was discovered. And I see this at Orvieto, and in Rome too, and other Italian cities. Have you seen the scalloped basalt tiles that are put on? Someone pointed out to me that, started with a question. This was actually Matt Dahl, the Gordon College director of the Orvieto program. He said, "Why do you think the pattern is this way? What do you think would be a cause for such scalloped patterns of basalt stones?" And one of us was able to discern that it was the arm span of a human, that it was it's what a workman would be able to do, staying in one spot, laying out stones, as 3 or 4 workmen might go up a street laying the stones. It was this movement. And those things just stay with you when you realize there are patterns that harmonize with our body and with the world as it comes to us. And these patterns create, or, in various ways create overlapping beauty, and then we can, if we see it in a basalt street in Orvieto, we might see the same pattern in literature. That's the way the cosmos is.
Exactly. Yeah, it's patterned, and patterns point to design, and designs point to designer. I mean, it's an old sequential argument, and you can do all your critical theory and take it apart if you want to, but that just means you're sad and lonely. Going back again to Vitruvius, he talks, he has it's either in book 3 or 4, the one on the temples, the ideales, right? And he says a temple is the most important of all buildings. They have to be useful, they have to be lasting, they have to be beautiful. But a temple, this is the habitation of our gods. It's also the local bank. And so they need to be symmetrical and beautiful and proportional and composed according to certain mathematical principles. So he's doing, kind of pre-Fibonacci stuff and harmonic and geometric mean and the golden mean and, all the nautilus and all of this marvelous
He's using all the liberal arts.
Yeah, well,
Yes,
that's what
exactly.
he's doing, right? Because they all come together in architecture. And what happens is he's writing this. I mean, this is like right around the time of Christ. I mean, this is, right there. So it's about 2,000 years old. And people studied that for a long, long time. The medievals weren't quite as interested in Vitruvian architecture, but there was this pretty smart guy from a little town called Vinci, and his name was Leonard, right? And so he, of course...
Let's give him another name.
Reads Leonardo da Vinci. And Lenny. And so he reads Vitruvius. He's like, oh, that's interesting. He's got all of this discussion about the temple and how the temple has to be symmetrical and proportional and beautiful and useful and lasting. And he sees that Vitruvius compares the temple with the human body, right? The palm is 4 fingers, and 3 palms from here to here to here. 3 palms makes a proportioned head, and all this kind of stuff. And Vitruvius produces this elaborate arithmetical, proportional, idealized body. And Da Vinci sits down with the pen and a piece of paper and says, I can draw that. And so he draws Vitruvian Man, which is also a self-portrait of Da Vinci's face, perfectly proportioned, right? The head to the navel to the feet, the knees to this and that, and inscribes them in the square and the circle, which is an ancient Greek geometric solve. Can you square at the circle area and the square area, and puts that in there, and then quotes Vitruvius backwards in Italian, which certainly he translated out of Latin, explaining how the human body, even the pagan Roman Vitruvius, understood that the human body should be perfect and proportional and beautiful, not just physically and arithmetically, but morally, because the body is a temple.
So just think how this could enlighten the student, illuminate the student if it's taught at the right time. We're a temple.
Yeah.
We are...
You can put that picture up, you can put that slide up, the quotes from Vitruvius, I've done it myself.
Yeah.
And it's one of the most iconic images in the world. The funny, it's become a meme now, as we would say. But
Symmetry.
you don't have to be in Italy. Now, I've seen the manuscript. They used to have it in a vault. I saw it then, now it's on display. But when you see that, it's not just a funny picture of a guy standing like this.
No.
And you connect that with the pagan recognition that mathematics, as Plato said, is the highest form of abstract thought. The human body is a temple.
In education and in classical education, we talk about this beautiful triad of truth, beauty, and goodness. For Vitruvius, you had the Vitruvian triad of utilitas, firmitas, and venustas, of usefulness, utility, of strength, stability, and of beauty and charm. And so when he designed buildings and he built buildings and the Romans copied him and used his forms, down even into the post-classical, late antique period, it was built for usefulness. It was built for endurance. And how many wonderful works of architecture in Rome do we see still enduring today? So I walked through first century tunnels that were created through mountains under the reign of Augustus that are still perfectly intact. But then also beauty. Beauty was important to them, and the symmetry, that perfect symmetry, which we can go back and rediscover through our mathematics, through our geometry, that's what gave it that sense of charm and beauty for Vitruvius and the Romans.
And there's used the 4 stanzas, the 4 fingers of a stanza of a poem, and how this a poem is a temple too, right? It embodies something, and it can be built beautifully. So I'm thinking of the Whitman poem, "A Noiseless Patient Spider," which is 4 stanzas and 4 stanzas. One is about a spider. seeking a place to stand in its vacant, vast surroundings, and the second is about the soul, detached, surrounded in measureless oceans of space. And it's just, they're just two parallel stanzas exploring what it means to be a soul, trying to make connections. It's beautiful, like a temple. A great
What are
poem.
those
It's
parts
beautiful.
of a poem? What's that word?
Oh, stanza, a
And in
room.
Italian, that stanza is a room. So the stanze de Raphael, the Raphael rooms in the Vatican, each part of the poem is a room. A room is a part. Poems are architectonically structured,
Yeah.
right? They are designed. This is why, and I know some modern poetry is wonderful, certainly Whitman, right? But the whole idea of free verse where you just ramble, it might be brilliant, it might be marvelous, but it's not going to have the power of things that are carefully crafted, like something by Jared Manley Hopkins, or by Shelley, or by Milton, or by Ovid, because there is a structuredness to it. A painting is made powerful because of the frame. The frame is actually what gives you freedom. If you tell a little kid, sit down and write whatever poem you want, they will produce garbage. But I've had students do this. All right, 3 of you together, I want you to produce a sonnet. You have an hour. And then they understand the strictures of a sonnet. That frame, that grid, that structure that is imposed on them, that drives them crazy at first, actually is what frees their capability.
Yeah.
If you decide to work in watercolors or oil as opposed to acrylic, that is not limiting, that's freedom. That's a limitation that leads.
So to have gazed upon a beautiful church like the Duomo in Florence or the Duomo in Orvieto and so many other churches in Rome and throughout Italy is analogous to having gazed upon, say, a beautiful sonnet by Shakespeare, or Ovid, or any other great. It's another temple-like experience. It's a visitation that you can memorize, that you can have seen it, and then it can become a part of you, and then it becomes a part of the architecture
Yes.
of your own soul, because you're a temple as well. So I just love these patterns that we're talking about. We're actually incarnating patterns. Even Vitruvius incarnated a pattern from his mind to an actual building, and then we see it, and then we take it. And Da Vinci sees that same temple-like pattern in the human body, and he also can't help himself but to make reference to the stanza of a poem. And now we're talking about literature. We find this world
And
is
literature being one of the most portable parts of pedagogical material, because you can carry a book anywhere and you can memorize a poem, right? And I consider how my light is spent, and then you can go on, right? Or if we had 10 hours, I could probably recite a large part of Paradise Lost. I would probably have a stroke, but I could maybe do it. We can bring images into classrooms. A little bit harder to do sculpture, right? But this is why the trivium is literary oratorical, grammar, logic, rhetoric, because language has a portability to it, that a cheap print of the School of Athens or the Mona Lisa will only go so far, and sculpture's a little bit harder. Now with the modern art form of film, which is different than movies, we can reproduce it and have a portability. The problem, of course, is with Vitruvius's primary form of art, which is architecture, art you can walk into. You need to go.
yeah.
If you haven't been inside of Chartres or Notre Dame or any of the Italian cathedrals or chapels you've mentioned, right? And as you talked about, going through those tunnels and walking into those ancient buildings, there's something where the embodiment, the material embodiment of other ancient people's work that still lasts. Who knows what literary texts were lost in the burnings of the Library of Alexandria, right? If Petrarch had not found some of Cicero's letters in that monastery, who knows if we would have had the same kind of Renaissance, because he's the guy that fired off the first shots, right? So you have to find what level of portability there is and then mitigate the rest. I can show you a picture of a sculpture, a photograph, but that's really kind of silly. A photograph of a painting is a different thing. Photograph of architecture, which is why YouTube is really helpful, because they're walking through these buildings. Now they're flying drones, though it's illegal in a lot of places. But when you see drone shots of Rome flying around the Colosseum, you get a feel as close
For the
to being there.
magnitude, yes.
Yeah, because you see the little people walking around.
And you get a sense of the dimension that you can't see in a photograph.
Well, let's do this because should we should conclude. Could each of you just share an experience or a story or an anecdote of teaching students while you were in situ in Rome, when something wonderful happened to your students or perhaps to you as well? When did you see, give us an example of how this kind of experience can be so meaningful to a student?
So I think the anecdote that I have, I mean, there's so many little things, but I think one of the big moments for me, when you see that recognition in the moment, is that we had entered the Borghese Gallery. And I was with a colleague who said, Karen, I'm not sure what's happening on the ceiling frescoes. Each room, by the way, in the Borghese Gallery has these marvelous frescoes that tell different stories, often, I think almost always, of mythological settings. And this was a very learned colleague, looked up and said, I'm not quite sure what's happening here. Can you tell me? And I looked up, and I immediately recognized the story. But instead of just telling him, I called our senior class over. And I said, okay, guys, I want you to look up. And I want you to tell me what you see, what's happening on the ceiling. And it took them a few moments. So I didn't tell them. I just asked a question. But I knew they had encountered the answer. So they look up, they talk about it. Oh, it's Dido and Aeneas. It's the story of Dido and Aeneas. And they're getting very excited about this. A lot of them had read the Aeneid with me and had journeyed through the up and downs of this relationship in book 4. And they began to go picture by picture and tell me and my colleague exactly what was happening in each one. And when they'd finished, first of all, my heart was just a cup overflowing with joy. They got it. Thank you, Lord, they got it. But I said, okay, I want you to just think for a moment about what just happened here. And I said, look around you at all the people in this gallery. How many of them are looking up? They're not. And I said, but you were able to tell me that story because of what you've read, because of what you have embodied it through not just the English reading, but even the Latin reading. You've wrestled with and struggled with the lines, the poetry, the emotional encounter between these two people. And I said, because you've read the Aeneid and the Metamorphosis and the Bible, I said, as you walk through this gallery, you can tell me, maybe not pinpoint accuracy, but you can tell me the story, the conversation that's happening between all of these different paintings. There was another room where we saw Bernini's David, and he's winding up. He's not the David of Michelangelo. He's a ruddy young boy who is twisted, turning, getting ready to fire his slingshot. And when they follow the line of sight from that slingshot to the wall across, what do they see? They see an oil painting of another David holding up the head of Goliath with the wound right here in his forehead. They were placed in conversation, and they got that. And I said, do you see what you 18-year-old can do because of the language, because of the literature that you have studied? And in that moment, I could see the twinkle and the gleam in their eye and the conversation, the empowerment that they were like, oh, yes, we get this. And an education that they had taken, I don't want to overstate this, but to some extent, it's human nature, they took for granted. They suddenly began to realize the superpower that they had in order to recognize and be in conversation with where they were. And it really didn't just delight my heart. I could see the delight and the wonder in their eyes.
They had been given eyes to see?
Yes.
Yeah, literally and metaphorically. That's wonderful. What a beautiful story. And I've seen Donatello's David there. There's just so much there at the Borghese. And a beautiful poem by B.H. Fairchild about that. Have you seen this poem, Beauty? We can talk about it when the cameras are off. Grant, how about you? What comes to mind?
Yeah, that is a great, that's a wonderful story. You told me that one a little while ago, and I was like, I love stories like that, because ignorance doesn't make you feel good. It doesn't leave you with hope. It doesn't leave you with joy. It doesn't give you aesthetic pleasure, but you don't know why. It's like when a baby is sick, when you're holding your 9-month-old and they have their first bad fever and they don't understand. It's going to end. You'll feel better tomorrow. They're just miserable. And you don't, I mean, that's very much the fallen human condition, right? Until the eyes are open. I tell students when I take them to a city for the first time, for instance, Florence, in at least the first half a day, if not the first full day, no phones. Don't even turn them on. Don't get them out of the pocket. You are going to have an unmediated experience like people have been having for centuries in this magical place. You're going to hate me now, but you're going to thank me later. And they inevitably thank me. And the next day, you can take all the pictures you want and load up all your Insta-face, whoozy, whatsy stuff on the social media, right? So I'm going to tell you a story about Venice, not Rome. My favorite painting of all time. I saw it first when I was a teenager, just an image in a book, and I thought that's the weirdest thing I've ever seen. And I could not stop looking at it. It's this very strange painting from sometime between 1501, 1504. And it's got a landscape. It looks kind of swampy. There's a little bit of a town. There's some trees blowing in the breeze. There's this thunderstorm in the background. It's kind of vague. It's not very, very high realism, but it's clearly a Renaissance piece. And there is either a backlit side of a cloud or maybe a lightning bolt. You can't really tell, but there's this big bright flash in the sky. And in the viewer's left, there's this guy standing there in a weird looking, almost like a jester's outfit. It's just kind of a Renaissance casual wear. And he's standing there holding his staff. And he's looking to the left. And off to the left is a woman who just has a kind of a sheet, almost like a shawl, very loosely wrapped around her. And she's exposed to breast and she's nursing a little baby. Okay? And so you're looking and you see this male character and he's looking to his left, looking at her. And it's just very weird and awkward. Like, who is this guy? Why is he looking at her? Why is she comfortable, in this exposed nursing situation, sitting in this kind of swampy city with a canal in the background? It was painted by a painter that's largely identified with Venice. His name is Giorgione Castelfranco. We know almost nothing about him. He's mentioned in a few early catalogs, and this is his famous painting, La Tempesta, The Tempest. And it's called that because there's a storm in the background. He's in some ways the inventor of Renaissance Venetian-style landscape painting. And Venice gets these wild thunderstorms because you get cold Adriatic and sometimes hot Adriatic air hitting cold alpine air dropping down. You get these wild thunderstorms over the swamp that Venice is built on. And people ask me, why is that your favorite painting? I've never even heard of it. I said, I don't know. It's like when students in my Shakespeare class say, so what does Hamlet mean? And I'm like, I don't know. That's why I keep coming back. Right? It's like, well, why do you love this person? Why have you been married to them for 60 years? I keep coming back. It's a mystery. I can't quite put my finger on it, right? And like all of us, if you're bored, you leave. You leave the museum, you walk out of the movie, you put the book down, you stop reading the poem, right? Yeah, I don't like coffee, ice cream. I like ice cream, I like coffee. I don't like them together. I don't finish my bowl of coffee and ice cream. I love this painting because it is a nut that I cannot crack. It's it's not the most beautiful thing I've ever seen, but it's so mysterious. It's set on one of these early Venetian lagoon islands. Who's the woman? Some people are like, oh, that's Mary, nursing Jesus. No one painted Mary like that. No one ever painted Mary like that. And is that guy Joseph, dressed like a jester? What's going on there? And what's the point of the storm? People concoct all kinds of strange ideas. So I take people to Venice a couple of times a year, and we go to the Galleria Accademia in the Dorso d'Oro neighborhood across the bridge from the main part of town. And we go into this gallery, and it's primarily Venetian painters. And their prized possession is Giorgione's La Tempesta. And I tell students how much I love it, and they're like, oh, this is going to be wonderful, beautiful. And they get there, and they're like, you like that? That's like saying your favorite car is the Pontiac Aztec. Or, 1982 Volvo station wagon in metallic gray. It's like, you could have chosen a 1966 Porsche Targa, and you picked that? It's not beautiful, which opens up questions of what is beauty? Is it in the eye of the beholder? Is it objective? So on and so forth. And I tell the students, just let me tell you what I see in the painting, and let me describe it to you, but I'm not going to try to tell you what it means. And I want you to just linger and look at it for as long as you can. Some students will walk away immediately after the little mini lecture. And, the guards, they see me coming, they're, oh, it's you again, senor, please, not an hour again, please go. Because that, first name basis with a lot of...
La Tempesta,
right.
qui.
Basta, go away. It's enough. And, but some students linger. And then some go over and look at, something else, and some people go over here. But I had a student several years ago named Hannah, who later worked for me as a personal assistant, wonderful, brilliant young lady. And she didn't leave the painting. And after a while, I'm like, well, we do have to move into the next room. And we moved from room to room. Like, well, where's Hannah? Where's Hannah? Well, she kept going back to look at Giorgione's Tempest. She kept going back. And finally, the museum is closing. Attenzione, per favore, leave. Right? And, I'm like, has anybody seen Hannah? I think she went back again. And I came around the corner to find her. They were literally kicking my students out the door. I said, I got to go find Hannah. She's upstairs with Giorgione. I go up there and she was standing there. And she wasn't crying. She was like weeping. She was shaking. And I said, what happened, Hannah? And she said, I don't know. And that's the right kind of disorientation. Because if I can explain it to you, I'm wasting your time and my time as a student and a teacher. That doesn't mean that there's no truth. And it doesn't mean that there are things that I don't know and I can't tell my students. Of course, there is information I can transmit. But if you don't go beyond that, right? If you don't go beyond, oh, okay, well, leave your nuts and follow me. If you don't get to who do men say that I am, if you don't get to the penetration of the heart of the mystery, then you're not teaching, you're just talking. And there's something about being in front of a painting or a sculpture or inside of amazing architecture. Just like there's something like standing on the shore and watching your first Pacific sunset or Atlantic sunset, right? There's something about walking in the forest or walking up a mountainside or seeing the Great Plains thunderstorms for the first time that can never be replaced with a lecture or a paragraph in a book.
Yeah, I'm thinking of your first child calling you daddy. There's so many of these experiences that you're calling up. And you're also reminding us that wonder itself, one of the definitions of wonder, or at least one of its connotations, is that it embodies ignorance. We wonder at those things that we don't understand, or at least fully understand. We know there's more, and we can't crack the nut, but we keep staring at it. It's a wonderful way to end, but I would like you to just maybe let our viewers and listeners know how they can find you on the internet, or if they wanted to contact you, and maybe mention some of your works. We'll start with you, Grant. What have you written, and how can people find you?
Sure. Yeah. There's probably a lot of gossip and slander on the internet, but you should ignore that. I'm a professor at the Masters University, which is in Santa Clarita, California. It is a school that is explicitly Christian and conservative and traditional. We are in the Reformed Baptist tradition, but we have a wide variety of students. But the faculty, staff, and board are in the Reformed Baptist tradition. And we are approaching 100 years. It's coming up in another 2 years. So we are only 900 years newer than the University of Bologna, which is the oldest university, more or less, in Europe. My first book, which is about 15 or 18 years ago, is Meaning at the Movies, which was published by Crossway. And it is a theology book disguised as a discussion of why film art has such a powerful effect on our consciousness. And Classical Academic Press wonderfully published my little book on John Milton, Classical Learning and the Progress of Virtue, the Miltonic Puritan Christian idea that reading and studying widely is useful for a Christian in order to develop the virtue of discernment. And I've written a couple of other books, including some from Canon Press. They published a Reader's Guide to Dracula. And then I think I did another one with them. I'm trying to remember. I'm currently working on a couple of things. I have a full-length academic book that I'm working on getting published right now, which is on the theological relationship between John Milton and John Calvin. That's only available in published form as a dissertation right now, and who reads dissertations? But I'm turning that into a book. That's done and just being finalized. And my current major project is historical fiction, which is something new for me, but it's heavily academically researched, and it is on the designing and building of Brunelleschi's massive cupola, the dome that sits on top of the Florence Cathedral. A number of books have been written on that, so I've been spending over a decade studying architecture, engineering, medieval thought, Vitruvius, and Brunelleschi, this funny-looking little 5'2" Florentine genius whose ego got crushed when he lost one major contract to Lorenzo Ghiberti and decided to build something bigger and better than anything Ghiberti could do with his little doors on the baptistry, as he said. I'm kind of living in Florence in my head and reading diaries from the 1400s and architectural manuscripts and things like that. And that will come out when I am done. It's going to be about 1,000 pages of manuscript. But I'm also a guy with a big family and a lot of grandkids, so I don't always have people on my lap. I also travel around and work with classical schools. I've worked with about 7 or 8 startups in California alone, and I work with a lot of young schools, helping them to build their curriculum and find and train and hire their faculty. I run a study abroad program in Italy in the summer through Masters University, and I am the founder and director of the Classical Liberal Arts undergraduate degree program that trains up young classical teachers to go out and conquer their worlds one classroom and one student at a time.
Thank you very much. So great to hear, and especially about California. More classical schools in California, please. How about you, Karen?
Yes. So I live in Georgetown, Texas. I built the third grade through 12th grade Latin program there, and Greek as well. And I still teach quite a bit there. I'm also an adjunct professor with Houston Christian University. And I'm actually going to be offering a class for audit this fall that I'm very excited about on Latin letters and their association with classical art and archaeology. And it's specifically designed as a remote class to help teachers out there who want to do continuing education. But, as teachers, when we get grounded with family and at a school, it's hard for us to just go and study. So this one's specifically designed to support teachers by having it at 4 p.m. Central Time on Mondays and Fridays. If you're interested, you can find that through Houston Christian University. I'm also the author of the Latin Alive series with Classical Academic Press and the Libellista Historia series. The LA series has just undergone a wonderful revision that has incorporated a good deal more of art and archaeology into the book. In fact, this summer I was on a trip to Italy and constantly taking pictures with my husband. I kept saying, I need this one for the book. I need this one for the book. And so he's decided to write the entire trip off as a business expense. So you can see a bit of what Grant and I are talking about as you study Latin in that book series. I also have a book, Hancus Ille Vacanus, so on the lighter side of Latin, Hank the cow dog is in Latin, and that's one is with Canon Press. Going back to Classical Academic Press, I've got a few courses on Classical U. One of them is on the Aeneid, Furor versus Pietas, and another one is on Classical Art and Archaeology, and I'm pleased to say that Grant and I are working on an expansion of that project with the specific idea of what you were asking earlier on pedagogy. We can't all take our students to Rome. How can we bring these things into our classroom? Or we do want to put together a senior trip program. So what should we start thinking about? How should we start orienting for that? Because all too often I think we tend to relegate art to the art class and humanities to the humanities class and Latin to the Latin classroom. And we need to start thinking more and more about how we integrate those things, how we can bring them together for our students. First and foremost in the classroom where they are, but then as I think Grant and I have both imparted, at some point in time, you need to go to Italy. You need to stand in those beautiful buildings. You need to stand before that art. You need to eat the gelato, and you need to just embrace the culture and the experience. So we're partnering together to create some teacher resources that will be forthcoming in the near future. So I'm very excited about that.
Thank you so much, both of you. So just note, you can find their books at Canon Press, Classical Academic Press, their course on Classical U. Almost forgot to mention that some of the pedagogies we're talking about, at least the embodied pedagogy that we're talking about, is something that Carrie and I cover in this book, The Good Teacher, 10 Key Pedagogical Principles That Will Transform Your Teaching. If you can't see it, at least you've heard the title there, and that's also available at Classical Academic Press. Thank you so much for your time and for your work. I certainly appreciate it, and I'm sure our viewers and listeners do as well. Thank you.